Cicero. Cicero had no appetite. It was the day after Octavian's visit, and he was perplexed and baffled man. He took one disinterested peck at the luncheon before him, then nervously took up his pen and scratched off the first words of a letter. "Oh, my dear Atticus," he wrote, "I fear that the Ides of March have brought me no gain." He put down the pen again, resting his forehead in his left hand. He leaned heavily on his elbow, as if the thick neck could no longer support that large cranium of his, now so weighted down with anxiety for the future of Rome. On the Ides of March, when Caesar had been assassinated, Cicero had believed that the worst was over, that the Roman Republic had been saved, authority had been restored to the Senate, and be back again to the hands of the good old conservative Republicans. Alas, such had not been the case. It seemed that they had rid themselves of one tyrant only to have another take his place. Every day came fresh word of the outrageous use of Mark Antony was making of Caesar's money and of records forged to further his own ends. Wouldn't you think he would have been warned by the fate of Caesar? Cicero spoke aloud to his accountant, reclining on the couch across the table. At the man's worthless reply, mumbled through a mouthful of asparagus, Cicero, in exasperation, picked up his pen again. Better to talk by letter to his good old friend Atticus, he thought. Atticus, besides being his best friend, was also Cicero's publisher. At this thriving establishment in Rome, he kept a large staff of handwritten experts constantly busy, turning out copies of Cicero's latest books, for which there was always a great demand. Every few days, letters passed between them. After the first paragraph of this letter, which was fairly long, Cicero continued, "Octavius is here. He is treating me in a very honorable and friendly manner. His followers are saluting him as Caesar, but his stepfather and I refuse to do so. What do you think of that boy going into Rome, where our liberators cannot safely be?" With a few more sentences, Cicero finished the letter, rolled the sheet of papyrus, tied and sealed it, and slipped it into a small tubular case in which the runner would carry it to Rome. That done, the old gentleman, laying a napkin over his eyes, settled himself back on his dining couch for a few winks of sleep. But sleep didn't come. Anxiety over Rome's uncertain future led to speculation about Octavius, and that brought him back to the subject of a book on which he was at work, The Nature of the Gods. Young Octavius seemed convinced that the gods had written his future in the stars. Well, that was not surprising. It was a common enough belief or mistake. No one thought Cicero, who looked up to the starry heavens and observed the orderly movements of the planets, could fail to believe that the universe was ruled by a divine mind and that human life in general was part of the one great plan. But that did not mean that the fate of any other person could be determined from the position of the stars at the time that he was born. If so, they were not all soldiers who died in a certain battle, born under the same unlucky star. No, astrology, though it might seem so, was hardly less inaccurate than those other popular forms of foretelling the future and the will of the gods, all of which he had described in an earlier book. Yet Octavius seemed to draw courage from the thought that he had been born under what he considered a lucky star, a sign of Capricorn. 19 years old, did he say he was born to be in September? According to that, thought Cicero, he must have been born the year that I was consul. On that very day, perhaps, I made my great oration against Catiline and exposed his vile plot to overthrow the Republic. Aha! What a speech that was! How my ringing words drove the traitor fleeing in disgrace from the Senate chamber. For a few happy moments, the old gentleman basked in the memory of the most celebrated day, that day on which the Senate had hailed him savior of the state and father of the country. But such escape from the unhappy present could not last. Ah, my poor country, he soon was thinking, now again in an hour of peril. And what can I do to save her? I dare not even return to Rome. 4 days later, he was writing Atticus of his dilemma. If civil war breaks out, I am not clear as to what I ought to do. I shall not be allowed to remain neutral. Anyone who Caesar's friends believe to have rejoiced at the death of Caesar, they will count as an enemy. The only thing that I can do then is to betake myself to the camp of Brutus. If I set out for Greece, I am sure to be criticized for having failed the state in an hour of peril. If I stay in Italy, I do so at some risk, but I suspect I can be of some service to my country. Therefore, do think this matter over as if your want in whatever concerns me. That was written April 26th. May 1st, he was writing from Cumae. Tired of Puteoli, Cicero had moved to another one of his 7 country villas. He was in better spirits, having heard that a certain marvelous fellow in Rome had hurled some Caesar's partisans from Tarpeian rock, crucified others, pulled down the column erected in Caesar's honor, and let a contract to pave the site. In short, wrote Cicero, he acted like a hero of old. Now I agree with you. Things are beginning to go better. I'll not go to Greece. I will not desert my Brutus. Brutus, too, Cicero felt, had acted like a hero of old in striking down the tyrant. Indeed, since the Ides of March, he had felt that the one hope of the Republic lay in Brutus, and since that day he had been waiting for Brutus to take charge. A month and a half he had been waiting, and what had Brutus done? Nothing, nor Cassius either. They had fled Rome, as had all the other liberators, and since then had been letting things take their own course, and what a course, steered by Mark Antony. Opposed by no one, Antony had gone on his way unhindered. As consul, he had now called a meeting of the Senate for June 1st. Cicero had considered going, but upon advice had decided not to. So June 1st, the day of the meeting, found him at another one of his 7 villas, writing another letter to Atticus. The place was Arpinium, a quiet little town near his own farm birthplace in the mountains. Charming, he said, and retired and free from interruption. If one wishes to write, but I should soon tire of that scenery here. It is so tame. I fear rainy weather too, for I hear the frogs disclaiming. He must have missed the rain, for very shortly Cicero had received a message which made him leave Arpinium at once. About June 5th, he was seated in his traveling litter and was being carried by his slaves down the dusty hillside road, then out along the fine Appian Way, paved with the smooth, square blocks of stone, and over to the sea coast. Riding along, he felt more optimistic and hopeful than for many a day. This time he was not going to another villa to fret about the future. He was on his way to Antium to meet Brutus. Brutus and Cassius, they had sent for him. They wanted his advice, those younger men. They must have a plan of action that included him, and why not? He was not too old to be of service. The citizens of Rome might yet hail him for second time as savior of the country. Who could tell? Who could tell what the meeting at Antium might lead to, thought Cicero, as he settled back comfortably in his litter and pulled aside the curtains to look out upon the passing scenes. Some great plan must be waiting his approval.